Section 20 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 20. The door opened. Elizabeth knew that her mother was resting. She came in very quietly. She stood perfectly still. Was it that some Mongol had been wrecked on the coast of Norfolk, as Mrs. Hilbery said, had mixed with the Dalloway ladies perhaps 100 years ago? For the Dalloways, in general, were fair-haired, blue-eyed. Elizabeth, on the contrary, was dark, had Chinese eyes and a pale face, an oriental mystery, was gentle, considerate, still. As a child she had had a perfect sense of humour, but now, at 17, why, Clarissa could not in the least understand, she had become very serious, like a hyacinth, sheathed in glossy green, with buds just tinted, a hyacinth which has had no sun. She stood quite still and looked at her mother. But the door was ajar, and outside the door was Miss Kilman, as Clarissa knew, Miss Kilman in her mackintosh, listening to whatever they said. Yes, Miss Kilman stood on the landing, and wore a mackintosh, but had her reasons. First, it was cheap. Second, she was over 40, and did not, after all, dress to please. She was poor, moreover, degradingly poor. Otherwise she would not be taking jobs from people like the Dalloways, from rich people who liked to be kind. Mr. Dalloway, to do him justice, had been kind. But Mrs. Dalloway had not. She had been merely condescending. She came from the most worthless of all classes, the rich, with a smattering of culture. They had expensive things everywhere. Pictures, carpets, lots of servants. She considered that she had a perfect right to anything that the Dalloways did for her. She had been cheated. Yes, the word was no exaggeration, for surely a girl has a right to some kind of happiness. And she had never been happy, what with being so clumsy and so poor. And then, just as she might have had a chance at Miss Dolby's school, the war came, and she had never been able to tell lies. Miss Dolby thought she would be happier with people who shared her views about the Germans. She had had to go. It was true that the family was of German origin, spelt the name Kielman in the 18th century, but her brother had been killed. They turned her out because she would not pretend that the Germans were all villains. When she had German friends, when the only happy days of her life had been spent in Germany, and after all she could read history, she had had to take whatever she could get. Mr. Dalloway had come across her working for the Friends. He had allowed her, and that was really generous of him, to teach his daughter history. Also she did a little extension lecturing and so on. Then our Lord had come to her, and here she always bowed her head. She had seen the light 2 years and 3 months ago. Now she did not envy women like Clarissa Dalloway. She pitied them. She pitied and despised them from the bottom of her heart as she stood on the soft carpet looking at the old engraving of a little girl with a muff. With all this luxury going on, what hope was there for a better state of things? Instead of lying on a sofa, "My mother is resting," Elizabeth had said. She should have been in a factory, behind a counter, Mrs. Dalloway and all the other fine ladies. Bitter and burning, Miss Kilman had turned into a church 2 years 3 months ago. She had heard the Reverend Edward Whittaker preach, the boys sing, had seen the solemn lights descend, and whether it was the music or the voices, she herself, when alone in the evening, found comfort in a violin, but the sound was excruciating, she had no ear. The hot and turbulent feelings which boiled and surged in her had been assuaged as she sat there, and she had wept copiously, and gone to call on Mr. Whittaker at his private house in Kensington. It was the hand of God, he said. The Lord had shown her the way. So now, whenever the hot and painful feelings boiled within her, this hatred of Mrs. Dalloway, this grudge against the world, she thought of God. She thought of Mr. Whittaker. Rage was succeeded by calm. A sweet savour filled her veins, her lips parted, and standing formidable upon the landing in her mackintosh, she looked with steady and sinister serenity at Mrs. Dalloway, who came out with her daughter. Elizabeth said she had forgotten her gloves. That was because Miss Kilman and her mother hated each other. She could not bear to see them together. She ran upstairs to find her gloves. But Miss Kilman did not hate Mrs. Dalloway. Turning her large gooseberry-coloured eyes upon Clarissa, observing her small pink face, her delicate body, her air of freshness and fashion, Miss Kilman felt, "Fool! Simpleton! You who have known neither sorrow nor pleasure, who have trifled your life away," and there rose in her an overmastering desire to overcome her, to unmask her. If she could have felled her, it would have eased her. But it was not the body. It was the soul and its mockery that she wished to subdue, make feel her mastery. If only she could make her weep, could ruin her, humiliate her, bring her to her knees, crying, "You are right." But this was God's will, not Miss Kilman's. It was to be a religious victory. So she glared, so she glowered. Clarissa was really shocked. This a Christian, this woman had taken her daughter from her. She in touch with invisible presences, heavy, ugly, commonplace, without kindness or grace. She know the meaning of life. "You are taking Elizabeth to the stores?" Mrs. Dalloway said. Miss Kilman said she was. They stood there. Miss Kilman was not going to make herself agreeable. She had always earned her living. Her knowledge of modern history was thorough in the extreme. She did out of her meagre income set aside so much for causes she believed in, whereas this woman did nothing, believed nothing, brought up her daughter, but here was Elizabeth rather out of breath, the beautiful girl. So they were going to the stores. Odd it was, as Miss Kilman stood there, and stand she did, with the power and taciturnity of some prehistoric monster, armoured for primeval warfare. How, second by second, the idea of her diminished. How hatred, which was for ideas, not people, crumbled. How she lost her malignity, her size, became second by second merely Miss Kilman, in a mackintosh, whom heaven knows Clarissa would have liked to help. At this dwindling of the monster, Clarissa laughed. Saying goodbye, she laughed. Off they went together, Miss Kilman and Elizabeth, downstairs. With a sudden impulse, with a violent anguish, for this woman who was taking her daughter from her, Clarissa leant over the banisters and cried out, "Remember the party! Remember our party tonight!" But Elizabeth had already opened the front door. There was a van passing. She did not answer. Love and religion, thought Clarissa, going back into the drawing-room, tingling all over. How detestable they are! For now that the body of Miss Kilman was not before her, it overwhelmed her, the idea. The cruellest things in the world, she thought, seeing them clumsy, hot, domineering, hypocritical, eavesdropping, jealous, infinitely cruel and unscrupulous, dressed in a mackintosh coat on the landing, love and religion. Had she ever tried to convert anyone herself? Did she not wish everybody merely to be themselves? And she watched out of the window the old lady opposite climbing upstairs. Let her climb upstairs if she wanted to. Let her stop. Then let her, as Clarissa had often seen her, gain her bedroom, part her curtains, and disappear again into the background. Somehow one respected that old woman looking out of the window, quite unconscious that she was being watched. There was something solemn in it, but love and religion would destroy that, whatever it was, the privacy of the soul. The odious Kilman would destroy it. Yet it was a sight that made her want to cry. Love destroyed too. Everything that was fine, everything that was true went. Take Peter Walsh now. There was a man, charming, clever, with ideas about everything. If you wanted to know about Pope, say, or Addison, or just to talk nonsense, what people were like, what things meant, Peter knew better than anyone. It was Peter who had helped her, Peter who had lent her books. But look at the women he loved. Vulgar, trivial, commonplace. Think of Peter in love. He came to see her after all these years, and what did he talk about? Himself. Horrible passion, she thought. Degrading passion, she thought, thinking of Kilman and her Elizabeth walking to the Army and Navy stores. Big Ben struck the half-hour. How extraordinary it was, strange, yes, touching, to see the old lady, they had been neighbours ever so many years, move away from the window, as if she were attached to that sound, that string. Gigantic as it was, it had something to do with her. Down, down, into the midst of ordinary things the finger fell, making the moment solemn. She was forced, so Clarissa imagined, by that sound, to move, to go. But where? Clarissa tried to follow her as she turned and disappeared, and could still just see her white cap moving at the back of the bedroom. She was still there, moving about at the other end of the room. Why creeds and prayers and mackintoshes? When, thought Clarissa, that's the miracle, that's the mystery. That old lady, she meant, whom she could see going from chest of drawers to dressing-table. She could still see her. and the supreme mystery which Kilman might say she had solved, or Peter might say he had solved, but Clarissa didn't believe either of them had the ghost of an idea of solving, was simply this. Here was one room, there another. Did religion solve that, or love? Love. But here the other clock, the clock which always struck 2 minutes after Big Ben, came shuffling in with its lap full of odds and ends, which it dumped down as if Big Ben were all very well with his Majesty laying down the law, so solemn, so just, but she must remember all sorts of little things besides. Mrs. Marsham, Ellie Henderson, glasses for ices, all sorts of things came flooding and lapping and dancing in on the wake of that solemn stroke which lay flat like a bar of gold on the sea. Mrs. Marsham, Ellie Henderson, glasses for ices. She must telephone now at once. Volubly, troublously, the late clock sounded, coming in on the wake of Big Ben with its lap full of trifles. Beaten up, broken up by the assault of carriages, the brutality of vans, the eager advance of myriads of angular men, of flaunting women, the domes and spires of offices and hospitals, the last relics of this lap full of odds and ends seemed to break, like the spray of an exhausted wave, upon the body of Miss Kilman, standing still in the street for a moment to mutter, "It is the flesh." It was the flesh that she must control. Clarissa Dalloway had insulted her, that she expected. But she had not triumphed. She had not mastered the flesh. Ugly, clumsy, Clarissa Dalloway had laughed at her for being that, and had revived the fleshly desires, for she minded looking as she did beside Clarissa. Nor could she talk as she did. But why wish to resemble her? Why? She despised Mrs. Dalloway from the bottom of her heart. She was not serious. She was not good. Her life was a tissue of vanity and deceit. Yet Doris Kilman had been overcome. She had, as a matter of fact, very nearly burst into tears when Clarissa Dalloway laughed at her. "It is the flesh, it is the flesh," she muttered, it being her habit to talk aloud, trying to subdue this turbulent and painful feeling as she walked down Victoria Street. She prayed to God. She could not help being ugly. She could not afford to buy pretty clothes. Clarissa Dalloway had laughed, but she would concentrate her mind upon something else until she had reached the pillar box. At any rate, she had got Elizabeth. But she would think of something else. She would think of Russia until she reached the pillar box. End of section 20. Read by Hannah Dormer, London, 22nd of August, 2021.